pudding can help us understand Christian nationalism. I know you don't believe me, but I promise we'll get to it. Everyone seems to be talking about Christian nationalism these days. Politicians, preachers, pundits, scholars, everyone has something to say about this issue.
I think the tough part about Christian nationalism is how do you even define it? What does that even mean? If I want more of God's laws to run our country, specifically, I don't want people to have the right to delete babies, does that make me a Christian nationalist if I'm going to work towards the eradication of that, both in the sense of personal choices and supporting nonprofits that do things to support folks in a situation, as well as work on it from a legislative standpoint? Does that make me a Christian nationalist? This is a tricky conversation, so let's hear them out.
Some of them are proudly wearing the label, while others are writing books to denounce the movement. One book is by Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. Both of them are professors of sociology. In it, they define Christian nationalism as the belief that America has been and should always be distinctively Christian from top to bottom.
I think that's a stretch. I don't think America has always been Christian from top to bottom. I think we would have serious theological issues with many of the founding fathers in terms of some of their theology, right? Now, were they influenced by Christian values? Absolutely, right? But explicitly Christian?
In its self-identity, interpretations of its own history, sacred symbols, cherished values, and public policies, and it aims to keep it this way. Now, some of you hear that and might think, that doesn't sound so bad. After all, wouldn't America be better if distinctly Christian values filled the country? But what exactly does that mean? For example, which Christian values are we talking about? There are thousands of churches and denominations in the U.S., and we're deeply divided over all kinds of stuff.
How about the ones that we all are on agreement with, right? Except the ones that are like mainline, completely outside of Orthodox. How about the ones that we agree with? Don't delete babies. How about that one? Can we all agree on that one and make that a law?
Christians are split over things like gender roles, the nature of sin, the definition of marriage. Good grief, we can't even agree on how many books are in the Bible.
Whoa. Most Christians believe in the nature of sin. Whether we agree with original sin or total depravity, we agree folks are sinful. Most of us agree marriage, Sky, is between one man and one woman, my brother. If you don't, I start going, you're coloring outside the lines of orthodoxy. Canon, okay, Catholics have a different canon, Eastern Orthodox have a different canon. Okay, I'll give you that one. Gender roles? I think most of us who are progressives are complementarians. And there are some folks that I would consider brothers and sisters in the Lord that are more egalitarian, right? But I don't know. Neither are these essentials. But let's keep going. Or gender roles, I would say, is not a huge essential, with the caveat of, I don't know. Let's keep going. Complementarianism, I think, is important, but I wouldn't say it's an essential.
And whether we should take Sunday or Saturday as a day of rest.
Oh,
and what about
stop it, Sky. Stop it. This man pulled out well, some people think that the Sabbath is on Saturday. Come on. If we look at throughout church history and say, what has been the consensus historically across all four arms, all four streams of the church? We could easily conclude that there are things that we all hold to.
Of the fellow citizens around us who aren't Christians, what place do they get to have in a country that is supposed to be Christian from top to bottom? As you can tell, there are lots of questions and critiques out there about Christian nationalism, and most of them focus on how the movement is both deeply un-American and dangerously un-Christian. And we've talked about it a lot on the Holy Post. I'm including some links in the show notes below the video with the best conversations and interviews we've done on the topic. But I want to talk about something a little bit different today. I want to get to the real core problem of Christian nationalism.
Okay.
A core problem that I think often gets overlooked in all of the details. And that brings me back to the pudding. So buckle up, a little more history here. Back in 1999, Healthy Choice Frozen Foods and Snacks launched a promotion that allowed customers to redeem barcodes from their product labels for frequent flyer miles. And a guy in California named David Phillips soon found a way to game the promotion when he realized that each individual pudding cup made by Healthy Choice had a barcode. And those pudding cups were just pennies per cup, way cheaper than their larger frozen meals. So he bought over 12,000 pudding cups, wherever he could find them, and his plan worked. In the end, he earned over 1.3 million miles, the equivalent of 30 flights around the world, and a lifetime platinum status with American Airlines. And he did it all with just $3,000 worth of pudding.
That man's a genius, if you ask me. That man's a genius.
Now, here's the important part. David Phillips doesn't care at all about pudding. In fact, he didn't even keep the pudding. He donated it to the Salvation Army.
Shout out
What
to
he
him.
really wanted were the frequent flyer miles. The pudding was just a convenient method to reach his goal. It
He a real MVP out here.
was a means to an end.
Yep.
The point of all of this is that what David Phillips did to pudding is exactly what Christian nationalism does to Christ. So if you
That made no sense. Oh, no.
I love the story. I don't know if I'm tracking with the illustration. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
In the end, Christian nationalism does not really care about Jesus. He's not the goal. Sure, Christian nationalists may talk a lot about God and Jesus and biblical values, just like David Phillips was all over town trying to buy pudding cups. In fact, people started calling him the pudding guy because from all appearances, it looked like he was all about pudding.
Sky, this is the appeal to motive fallacy. How do you know that guys like Joe Webbin, who I disagree with on quite a few things, like trying to take women's rights to vote, but how do you know that Joe Webbin doesn't genuinely love Jesus and genuinely want to further the gospel? Or Doug Wilson, or guys that are like embracing the Christian nationalist title, Vadi Baku. How do you know that these guys don't care about Jesus? That's an appeal to motive fallacy. You're assuming that you know their heart and their motives. Now, are there some other folks that probably fleece the Christian voter base? Absolutely. I would say Donald Trump fleeced the Christian voter base. Wasn't a Christian, didn't really care about Christians, but he needed that constituency to win the thing, right? The primary, 2015.
But underneath the surface, he had another goal in mind. And similarly, Christian nationalists may appear on the outside to be all about Christianity with their flags and crosses and signs, but deeper down, their actual goal is not Christianity.
I think this is a fallacy on Sky's part. I'll show you guys what it is. Again, I am not co-signing Christian nationalism, by the way. Appeal to motive is a pattern of argument which consists challenging a thesis by calling into question the motives of its proposer. It can be considered a special case of the ad hominem circumstantial argument. As such, this type of argument may be an informal fallacy. Yeah, so theomony would be a type of Christian nationalism, for sure. But again, I wouldn't jump out the window and say Jeff Durbin, James White, Marcus Pittman, who else? Doug Wilson don't care about Christianity and their goal is not Christianity. I don't know. I think that's a bit. Yeah, I think that's an appeal to motive fallacy. That would make you a mind reader.
Christianity is just a device, a tool that they use to achieve their real goal.
Okay, I would say yes, there are some people like that, but I would say the folks that are starting to embrace the title, I don't know if they're all like that. I couldn't speak on that. I think that's a hasty generalization fallacy.
Which is about cultural and political power. They talk very little about a life with God, but a lot about all the blessings they expect to get from God for themselves and for their country.
So again, I guess we would have to then figure out who is he talking about. If he's talking about the Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk types, I would say yes. I see where you're coming from. But if you're talking about the guys that are starting to embrace the label as of this year, I would say I think it's a poor analogy.
And here's the interesting part. When you actually read and listen to Christian nationalists, they don't hide this fact. They talk very openly about using Christian faith or using Christian values or using the Bible or even using Jesus to get what they really want, which is a country that looks more like themselves.
Okay, you got to come with some receipts, Guy, to make these sorts of to make this claim.
For example, Stephen Wolfe says,
Okay, thank you.
Christian nationalism is a totality of national action, consisting of civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation, and here's the key part, in order to procure for itself both earthly and heavenly good in Christ. There it is.
Okay, so who is Stephen Wolfe? Have you guys heard of Stephen Wolfe? So Stephen Wolfe has 16,000 followers on Instagram. We use not only scripture, but also reason in arguing against the pagans. It is evident. So this guy who has 16,000 followers is the authority on. I've never heard of this gentleman. Respectfully, he affirms the Westminster. Am I looking up the same guy? Yeah, same guy. Okay, I've never heard of this guy. There he is with Joe Webbin. Okay, but I've never heard of this guy. But to be fair to Sky, maybe this is the guy.
And very well-known Christian leader Franklin Graham puts it this way. One thing's for sure, our success as a nation depends on God. Our country can't turn its back on him and expect his hand of blessing to continue. In that statement, the pudding cup is God. We can't turn our back on God because we won't get what we really want, which is blessings.
Aha. Okay. Well, then I would agree. If that's the position that Christian nationalists take, then I would agree. If that's the agenda, then that's false. I would say that's demonic. Then Christianity just becomes a means to an end. I would say that's full on demonic. If that's a quote from these guys, I would say that's terrible.
Again, the goal is blessing from God, not God himself. And William Wolfe offers a warning for those who will not follow Christian nationalism. He says, Christianity is the indispensable moral, cultural, social, and spiritual foundation of the United States of America. And
I think that's a stretch. Christianity is the indispensable moral, cultural, social. I think that's a stretch.
if we utterly forget this and lose that foundation, little good will follow. There it is again, the good that will follow, the good blessings that will come from following the teachings of Jesus in our national setting. Whether it's securing earthly good for ourselves, national success and power, or the blessings of God for our country, in each of these cases and many more, it's evident that the goal of Christian nationalism is not Jesus.
Okay, that's fair, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, if from a policy standpoint, this is what we want for our country. This is what every country wants for their country. I mean, I don't know. You go to developing nations and you don't think they want this stuff? You don't think they want to create a better quality of life for the people in their country? You don't think they want to have national success and power? You don't think they want blessings from God? Oh, no, man.
Instead, he is just the pudding cup. Jesus is just the means to achieve what they really want, which is a stronger, more powerful, more successful country. In America, where their tribe of conservative white evangelical Christians is in control, from top to bottom. That's how Christian nationalism makes cultural and political power into a false god. There's another popular American heresy that operates the exact same way, and it's one that you might be more familiar with, the prosperity gospel. It also simply uses Jesus. It reduces him into a means of achieving some other goal. Okay. It says that if you worship Jesus and if you follow biblical principles, well, then God will give you what you really want: success, money, health, and fame. And it's an outrageously popular message in our very religious and very consumeristic culture. But here's the difference. A lot of Christians recognize...
Wow. He okay. I mean, okay. He says Christian nationalism is like prosperity gospel. I mean, a lot of these folks, I would say, are anti-prosperity gospel. At least the Doug Wilsons and all those folks. And again, there's a lot I don't agree with them on. I openly talked about that with Joe Webbin. But this is interesting.
...recognize the problem with the prosperity gospel. They recognize that it's not what Jesus and his apostles preached. They get it that the goal of the Christian life isn't really supposed to be money. But when those very same prosperity formulas are applied to something other than money, somehow we lose sight of the problem. We have difficulty recognizing the heresy for which it is. Consider purity culture. The purity culture movement, or what Caitlin Beatty calls the sexual prosperity gospel, told millions of Christian teenage boys that if they remained celibate, and it told many millions of Christian teenage girls that if they remained modest, then God would reward them with fantastic marriages and satisfying sex lives. In that form of the prosperity gospel, following Christian sexual ethics is the pudding cup. The real goal is satisfying sex lives and great marriages.
Put your thinking caps on for a minute. I have some issues with purity culture. If we're just being objective, according to the data, if you are celibate before getting married, and you do practice modesty, which I don't think it should be men or women, I think that should be a godly virtue and value, you will, at least statistically speaking, have a more successful sex life and be less likely to get divorced. That part is true. So just because along the way there were some things that were off about said path of God, ways of God, wisdom of God, in terms of the purity culture, that doesn't mean that it's completely false, right? Like if I tell you, hey, live on less than what you make, save for a 6-month emergency fund, make sure you get out of debt and stay out of debt, invest 20% of your income, don't go into more debt, develop some useful skills. And I could point you to scripture on how that's actually God's wisdom and ways of handling money and your career. Do you do those things because you want to be obedient to God, or do you do those things because you want cause and effect of being obedient to God, which is blessing? Which one would you would say that's a false dilemma? You would want both. I want God, I want God's ways of doing things, and I want the blessing of God, generally speaking, though not everybody who saves and does all the financial things is always going to, you want both.
Or what about the Gothard movement? Bill Gothard and his ultra-fundamentalist Institute for Basic Life...
Oh, no. He's done conflated Gothard. Ugh.
...principles. He taught millions of parents that if they just use his biblical principles, then their children would grow up to be obedient and godly Christians.
Yeah, now we're talking just full-on cult fundamentalism.
In this case, the pudding cup is using biblical principles, but the real goal was not Jesus. The real goal was having perfect children. In a way, it was just the...
Yes, the Gothard was off.
parenting.
But biblical principles often can lead and should lead to godly children. Not always, because people are still autonomous human beings.
Prosperity gospel. Each of these movements looks really Christian. They look Christian because they use Christian language and they reference the Bible a lot. But in each case, the goal isn't really Jesus.
And then I would ask, Sky, what do you mean by the goal being Jesus? What does that practically look like for you? Because to me, Jesus is being obedient to Jesus. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey my commands. So if I love Jesus, I'm going to obey his commands about money, about relationships, about finances, about a career, about faithfulness, about local church attendance, right? So what does that mean, want Jesus? What do you mean by want Jesus? Is that in a cerebral sense? Is that in a practical sense? Or is wanting Jesus is also living Jesus's way?
Instead, he's just the pudding cup. He's just a means to get what they really want, which is money or success or a great marriage or satisfying sex or perfect kids, or, in the case of Christian nationalism, political and cultural power. Christian nationalism is just the same old American heresy, but with a new goal. It isn't what Jesus taught. It's not what the apostles preached. It's not the mission of the church we read in the New Testament. And it isn't the surrender of power that we see in the cross. It guarantees God's blessing for our whole nation if we would just put the right people in power and pass the right biblical laws.
I don't think it guarantees anything. I mean, again, I don't know who he's referring to. I think people are just saying, hey, we just don't want to be on the wrong side of God.
And that's why millions of American Christians are eagerly embracing Christian nationalism. But you need to remember this. Any message in which Jesus is the means but not the goal is not true Christianity. It's idolatry. And that's why Christian nationalism may claim it's trying to make America more Christian, when in fact, it's doing exactly the opposite.
There's some bit of straw manning there. I think there's some truth there. I think there's some things that are not true there. And I think a lot of it is conflating God's clear ways, okay? God's clear ways for marriage is that you shouldn't have sex and that you should be modest. That's clearly in Scripture. Telling people to do that, and hey, by the way, if you do that, you're more likely to avoid a lot of the heartache. Yes. God's clear ways is that we protect the vulnerable, that we protect babies. I can't believe I got to say this out loud. And yes, if we do that, we will have increased birth rates and healthier families. God's clear ways for finance, right? These aren't crazy. These aren't crazy. So I think it's like this detachment from God's wisdom and God's ways from Jesus. I don't think you could detach that. I don't think it's the same as the prosperity gospel in that you give to get, or that you name it, claim it, or you blab it, grab it. I think if we're saying, hey, man, I think our country would be a lot better if elective wasn't an option, if kids weren't able to take puberty blockers and castrate themselves, I think our country would be in a much better place. So, I am confused. We see according to the Bible that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately help me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when he answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used from my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. And here's the thing, with the hope to create a prayer movement, we've made the PDF version of this prayer journal completely free. So to get the PDF of our prayer journal completely for free, go to blessgodpdf.shop